"How did you get that rifle?" The question sliced through the dry desert air, sharp and coated in condescension. Captain Miller stood with his hands on his hips, his perfectly pressed uniform a stark contrast to the dust and grit of the advanced marksmanship range. His voice was loud, intended for the audience of elite shooters lining the firing positions, each one pausing their own preparations to watch the unfolding drama. The crowd of hardened soldiers, men who lived and breathed ballistics, offered a ripple of nervous chuckles. They looked at the woman, then at the rifle in her hands, and then back at the captain, their silence a form of complicity. But the target of his scorn, a sergeant whose nameplate read Rostova, offered no reaction. She didn't flinch. Her eyes didn't lift from her work. Her hands, steady and sure, continued their methodical dance, wiping down the carbon steel barrel of the M40 A5 resting on the cleaning cradle. It was a relic, a thing of legend, its walnut stock worn smooth and dark with the oils of 100 missions and the ghost of 1,000 patient heartbeats. It was a rifle that didn't belong in the hands of a logistics sergeant, which is what everyone, including Captain Miller, assumed she was. He saw her slight frame, her unassuming face devoid of the hardened lines he associated with true operators, and his mind, clouded by assumption, filled in the blanks with prejudice. He saw a clerk, a paper pusher who had somehow ended up with a master's tool. But from a shaded observation tower 200 yards away, General Thorne saw something else entirely. He wasn't looking at her face or her uniform. He was looking at her hands. He saw the economy of motion, the practiced, almost reverent way she disassembled the bolt, the quiet confidence in every turn of the wrench. He saw a posture honed not by parade grounds, but by long, agonizing hours spent motionless in hostile territory. The general saw a professional, and a deep, cold stillness settled over him. He knew this was not a comedy. It was a prelude. If you believe that true respect is earned in silence and proven by action, type vindication below. Captain Miller, enjoying the captive audience, pressed his attack. "Seriously, Sergeant, did you win it in a raffle? Find it in a surplus bin? That is a legacy weapon. It has a history. It belongs to a shooter, a real one, not someone who's just here to check a box for the annual qualification." His words were a performance, each syllable crafted to diminish her, to place her firmly in a box he had constructed for her. The snickers from the line grew a little bolder, a few of the younger men puffing out their chests in alignment with the captain's perceived authority. They saw what he saw, an anomaly, an outsider in their sacred space. Rostova finally paused her work. The silence on the range stretched thin, taut with anticipation. She picked up a small, oil-stained cloth and began to meticulously polish the rifle's scope, her movements slow and deliberate. Every gesture was an answer, a quiet refutation of his entire worldview. Her calm was a fortress, his arrogance was a wave breaking against it, dissipating into harmless foam. She didn't need to speak. Her silence was a language all its own, a dialect of discipline and profound competence that Miller, for all his bluster, could not comprehend. He mistook her poise for weakness, her silence for fear. He saw a woman out of her place, when in fact, she was the only one on that entire range who was truly home. The rifle in her hands wasn't just a tool. It was an extension of her will, a familiar weight she had carried through places Miller only read about in classified after-action reports. The worn stock didn't speak of age. It spoke of a covenant between warrior and weapon, a partnership forged in the crucible of absolute consequence. The deep, almost black grain of the wood held memories, echoes of whispered wind calls in the Hindu Kush, the biting cold of Arctic observation posts, the suffocating humidity of jungle hides. It was a silent testament to a life lived at the very edge of human capability, a life that required no announcement, no validation from a man like Captain Miller. Her focus remained entirely on the task at hand, preparing the instrument for its work, an act of professional devotion that was as natural to her as breathing. The range safety officer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, announcing the final event of the day, the cold bore challenge. A single shot, from a clean, cold barrel, at a 15-inch target placed at an impossible 2,200 yards. It was a test not just of skill, but of instinct, a measure of a sniper's soul. It was a shot that accounted for the Earth's rotation, for the subtle dance of barometric pressure, for the treacherous, shifting winds that swept across the valley floor like unseen ghosts. It was a shot most of the men on the line considered a matter of luck, a prayer sent downrange. For Rostova, it was just math. She rose without a word, her movements fluid and economical. She carried the M40 to the firing line, its weight settled comfortably in her grasp. She laid down on her shooting mat, the worn canvas smelling of dust and sun. There was no hesitation, no wasted energy. While other shooters fidgeted, consulting digital wind meters and complex ballistic calculators, Rostova simply observed. She watched the distant shimmer of heat haze, the lazy drift of a single hawk circling high above, the way the tall grass bent and swayed in the gullies. Her preparation was an internal symphony of senses and calculations, a lifetime of experience distilled into a single, crystalline moment of focus. She was not just looking at the environment. She was reading it, deciphering its secret language. Captain Miller watched her, a smirk playing on his lips, ready to witness the failure he was so certain was coming. He folded his arms, a posture of judgment, and prepared a fresh round of sarcastic remarks for when her shot inevitably missed the target, and likely the entire berm behind it. He saw her close her eyes for a brief second, a picture of serene concentration, and he mistook it for a sign of her giving up. He couldn't see the world she saw behind those closed lids, a mental map of the wind's journey, a precise calculation of bullet drop, a perfect, unwavering line drawn from her eye to the heart of the distant steel. The world seemed to hold its breath. Rostova's finger curled around the trigger, her breathing slowing until it was barely perceptible, a shallow rhythm that matched the resting pulse of the earth itself. She was no longer just a soldier on a range. She was a fulcrum, a point of absolute stillness in a world of chaotic variables. She found the space between her heartbeats, that infinitesimal pause of perfect calm, and in that void, she pressed the trigger. The rifle's report was not a violent explosion but a sharp, clean crack, a single, definitive statement that ripped through the heavy silence. The recoil was a familiar push, a conversation she'd had with this weapon 1,000 times before. She didn't break her form, her eye remaining glued to the scope, watching the vapor trail of her own bullet arc across the immense distance. For a few agonizing seconds, there was nothing. The men on the line held their breath, their own scopes trained on the distant target, waiting. And then, a sound. Not the loud clang of a solid hit, but a faint, almost musical ping that traveled back across the valley, followed by the electronic flash of the hit indicator light on the range tower. But it wasn't just a hit. On the high-definition monitor in the observation post, the image resolved. It showed the 15-inch steel plate, and at its absolute, geometric center, a single, perfect hole. A hole no bigger than a dime. A shot that wasn't just a success, it was a statistical impossibility. A dead silence fell over the firing line. It was a silence so profound it was almost a physical force, pressing in on them, heavier than the desert heat. Shooters slowly, reverently, lowered their own multi-thousand-dollar, state-of-the-art rifles. They turned their heads as one, their expressions a mixture of shock, awe, and dawning shame. Captain Miller stood frozen, his jaw slack, his face a mask of utter, uncomprehending disbelief. The smirk had vanished, replaced by a pale, hollow look. The world he had so confidently constructed, a world where he was the arbiter of competence, had been shattered by a single, perfectly placed round. The sound of Rostova's bolt action, a smooth, metallic schlick-schlack as she ejected the spent casing, was the only noise in the universe. It was the sound of undeniable, irrefutable proof. General Thorne descended from the observation tower, his boots crunching on the gravel with a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to count down the final seconds of Captain Miller's career. The crowd of shooters parted before him like the Red Sea, their awe for the impossible shot quickly replaced by a primal fear of the approaching command presence. Thorne didn't look at them. His eyes, cold and clear as chipped ice, were fixed on the pale-faced captain. He walked past Miller without a word, stopping directly in front of Sergeant Rostova, who was now calmly packing her gear, her work for the day complete. The general's aide hurried to his side, holding out a secured data slate. Thorne took it, his thumb pressing against the biometric scanner. The screen glowed to life, displaying a file so heavily redacted it was mostly black bars. But the parts that were visible were enough to rewrite the reality of everyone on that range. The general's voice was quiet, yet it carried across the silent desert with the weight of thunder. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words were a verdict. "Captain Miller," he began, his voice dangerously soft. "You asked this sergeant how she got her rifle." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. He then tilted the data slate so Miller, and everyone else close enough, could see the screen. Personnel file, Rostova, Elena. Unit classification, Tier 1 Special Mission Unit. Designation redacted. Active combat deployments, 17. Confirmed engagements, classified. Marksmanship qualifications, Masterclass, all systems. Instructor, Special Activities Center. Recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross for actions in the Korangal Valley. Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling Miller's arrogant assumptions piece by piece. The name of the unit, one whispered only in the highest echelons of command, hung in the air like a ghost. 17 deployments. The Distinguished Service Cross. It wasn't a record, it was a saga. General Thorne looked from the slate to the rifle Rostova was now casing. "You asked about the history of that weapon, Captain." He gestured towards the M40. "That rifle was built by the master gunsmiths at Quantico's Precision Weapons Section. It was issued to a legend, a man who took shots people said were impossible long before we had computers to do the math for us. A man who held a ridgeline for 3 days against an entire enemy platoon with nothing but that rifle and 10 rounds. His name was Gunnery Sergeant Dmitry Rostova." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Thorne looked directly at Rostova, his expression softening for the first time. Her father. The revelation landed with the force of a physical impact. This wasn't just a rifle she had been issued. It was a legacy she was carrying. It was an heirloom, a sacred trust passed from one master to another. The worn stock was not from institutional use. It was shaped by the hands of her own blood. General Thorne then did something that no one on that range had ever seen. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and executed a slow, perfect salute. It was not the casual gesture of a superior to a subordinate. It was the profound, unwavering salute of a warrior acknowledging a master of his craft, a sign of ultimate respect that transcended rank, protocol, and gender. He held it, his eyes locked on hers. Sergeant Rostova, her face betraying no emotion, simply nodded once, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement between equals. Thorne then turned his gaze back to the petrified Captain Miller. "Assumptions, Captain," the general said, his voice now like steel. "Assumptions are a cancer in a meritocracy. They create weakness where there should be strength. You did not see a sergeant. You saw what you wanted to see. You failed to recognize a level of professionalism that you, in your entire career, will likely never achieve. You owe Sergeant Rostova an apology. And then you owe me a full report on why you believe you are still fit for command." The general's words were not just a reprimand. They were an institutional course correction, a public and undeniable recalibration of what truly mattered. Not the rank on the collar, but the competence in the soul. The story of Sergeant Rostova's shots spread through the base like wildfire, then leapt from the base to the wider community of the armed forces. It became a modern legend, a piece of digital folklore passed through secure text messages, whispered in chow halls, and recounted with reverent embellishment in smoky bars near military installations around the world. In the retelling, the target grew smaller, the distance longer, the wind more ferocious. The story became a parable, a cautionary tale for arrogant officers and a source of quiet inspiration for the enlisted ranks. It was a story about how the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, how true excellence requires no announcement. Captain Miller was not discharged, but his humiliation was a far greater punishment. General Thorne had him reassigned, not to a desk job, but to the role of primary instructor for new recruits at that very same marksmanship range. His first duty, every single morning, was to walk past the main hall of the training command building. There, mounted on the wall in a glass case, was the steel target from that day. In its perfect center was the hole, a tiny portal to a new standard of excellence. A simple, polished brass plaque was affixed below it. It read, "The Rostova Standard, 2,200 yards." One shot. One kill. Assumptions are the enemy. Miller would stop before it every day, the memory of his own arrogance a fresh wound. He became a changed man. His lectures to young soldiers were no longer about the technical aspects of shooting alone. They were about humility, about the danger of ego, and about the profound duty to recognize competence wherever it was found, regardless of the vessel it inhabited. He never spoke of Sergeant Rostova by name in a casual way. When he told the story, which he was required to do for every new class, he referred to her only as the Master, a title of his own creation, a personal penance and a sign of his newfound respect. Sergeant Rostova, for her part, deflected all attention. When younger soldiers, emboldened by her new legendary status, would approach her with questions, seeking some secret knowledge or magical technique, her answer was always the same, delivered in her characteristically quiet, direct manner. "There is no secret," she would say, cleaning the M40 with the same methodical patience as always. "There is only the process. Master the fundamentals. Control your breathing. Know your weapon. The rest is just noise." Her humility was as profound as her skill, and in many ways, more instructive. She showed them that true confidence doesn't need to be loud. It is a quiet, internal certainty built on a foundation of thousands of hours of disciplined practice. She was a living embodiment of the principle that actions will always speak louder than words. The M40 rifle, once an object of Miller's ignorant scorn, became a symbol of this philosophy. It was a legacy weapon not because of its age or its kill count, but because of the standard of excellence it represented. It was a physical link between two generations of quiet professionals, a father and a daughter who shared not just blood, but a sacred commitment to their craft. The worn walnut stock became an object of reverence on the base. To be allowed to see it, to touch the smooth, dark wood, was considered an honor. It was a reminder that the greatest warriors are often the ones you never see coming, the ones who walk quietly, carry a heavy burden, and when the moment comes, deliver a single, perfect, undeniable result. Her legend was not about a single shot, but about the lifetime of discipline that made the shot possible. It was a testament to the idea that competence, in its purest form, is its own reward and its own validation. Months later, a new class of sniper candidates stood on that same firing line, the desert sun beating down on them. They were the best of the best, young, confident, and eager to prove themselves. Captain Miller stood before them, his demeanor now sober and respectful. He was a different man, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had learned a hard and necessary lesson. He didn't begin with ballistics charts or wind-reading techniques. Instead, he pointed a single finger towards the distant, shimmering targets, barely visible to the naked eye. "Before you touch your rifles," he said, his voice resonating with a gravity that commanded their absolute attention, "you need to understand where you are. This is not just a range. This is a classroom. And the most important lesson you will ever learn here was taught by a sergeant who fired a single shot from that very position." He then recounted the story of that day, not as a piece of gossip, but as a foundational text. He told them about his own arrogance, his own blindness. He laid his mistake bare for them to see, offering his own failure as a shield to protect them from making the same one. "Your ego," he told them, his eyes scanning each of their faces, "is the heaviest thing you will ever carry. It will slow you down. It will make you deaf to wisdom and blind to true talent. The moment you think you know everything is the moment you have sealed your own failure. The person next to you, regardless of their rank, their age, their gender, or where they come from, may be the one who holds the key to your survival. Your job is to be humble enough to listen, to watch, and to learn." The story of Sergeant Rostova had become institutionalized, transformed from a moment of personal vindication into a core tenet of the training philosophy. Her legacy was not the impossible shot itself, but the lesson it taught, a lesson that now echoed in the ethos of every new shooter who passed through that sacred ground. Rostova was long gone, reassigned to another shadowed corner of the globe where her skills were needed, her name once again becoming a whisper on a classified roster. She left nothing behind but a single, perfect hole in a piece of steel and a fundamental change in the culture of a place. Her quiet competence had done more to shape the next generation of warriors than 1,000 motivational speeches ever could. Her legacy wasn't a statue or a medal hanging on a wall. It was in the newfound humility of a captain, in the watchful eyes of young recruits who now looked for skill instead of status, and in the institutional memory of a standard that now bore her name. It was a living legacy, a ripple of positive change that continued to spread long after she had departed. True strength, the kind that endures, is not forged in the fires of public acclaim or announced with the trumpets of arrogance. It is tempered in the silent, lonely hours of practice. It is honed by the relentless pursuit of perfection, driven by an internal code of honor that demands nothing less than one's absolute best. Respect is not a right of rank. It is a debt owed to demonstrated excellence. And a true legend is not defined by the stories told about them, but by the standards they inspire in others, creating a chain of competence that strengthens the very fabric of the community they serve. The quiet professional seeks no glory, but their actions create a light that illuminates the path for everyone who follows. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.